No one tells you this. The most dangerous moment in life isn't when you fall apart, but when you stand back up in silence, when there's no applause, no witnesses, and you're forced to save yourself. Welcome to Quiet Discipline Method. They look at you now and call it luck. They see the calm in your face, the way you no longer get pulled into chaos, the way you stand steady where others collapse. What they never see are the nights you held your breath so you wouldn't cry out loud, the days you carried weight no one asked about, the mornings you woke up asking, how much longer can I take this, and still moved forward. They only see the outcome. They never see the process. And because they don't see it, they don't understand. No one saw you standing in silent rooms where promises fell apart. No one saw you learn how to hold yourself together without a safety net. No one saw you stitch your trust back together, piece by piece, while the world kept moving as if you had never fallen. They only see you on the other side of the storm and wonder why you didn't break. The truth is this: you walked through the fire alone, and once someone survives without being pulled up by anyone else, fear loses its grip. You didn't become strong because life was gentle. You became strong because you learned how to stand when life turned away. There's a kind of strength that makes no noise. It doesn't need witnesses, recognition, or approval. It's forged in moments when no one would know if you collapsed. That's where you learned how to control your breath, plant your feet, and remind yourself to take just one more step, then another. They didn't see the moments you stood at the edge of quitting and chose to continue, not because hope was loud, but because discipline was quiet. Not because someone told you to keep going, but because you understood that if you didn't stand up for yourself, no one else would. You learned to carry pain like a teacher, not a sentence. You learned to let silence do its work, sharpening you, stripping away illusions, leaving only what mattered. If you're still listening, subscribe to Quiet Discipline Method to support the channel. Your support gives us the drive to keep creating deeper, honest, and useful content for those who choose quiet discipline over noise. Because some battles don't need an audience. Some victories are known by only one person, you. And when you walk out of them, you don't need to prove anything. You know where you've been. You know what you survived when no one was watching. They may call you cold. In reality, you're no longer panicked. They may call you distant. In reality, you no longer need to explain yourself. Because the most dangerous part is already behind you. The moment you learned how to stand in silence and realized you don't disappear when everything falls apart. Reflection question. Comment A or B. A. True strength comes from recognition by others. B. True strength is forged when no one is watching. When you are left with no applause, no encouragement, no one reminding you who you are, something fundamental begins to change inside you. This is where the real training starts, not in comfort, not in confidence, but in repetition, in showing up when nothing inside you feels inspired, in continuing when quitting would make perfect sense. At first, it feels like punishment, like life has stripped everything away and left you exposed. But over time, you realize it is a forge. Every quiet morning you get up without motivation, every task you complete without recognition, every promise you keep to yourself when breaking it would go unnoticed, these moments accumulate. They harden into discipline. Discipline is not intensity. It is not passion or excitement. Discipline is structure when emotion fails. It is the ability to act without needing to feel ready. When no one is watching, discipline becomes your backbone. It replaces reassurance. It replaces motivation. It becomes the thing that carries you through days that once would have broken you. Pain plays a role here, but not the way most people think. Pain does not automatically make you stronger. Pain without reflection only creates exhaustion. What changes you is how often you stay present with it without running. When escape is no longer an option, pain becomes information. It shows you your limits and then forces you to expand them. In that isolation, you learn practical survival skills no one teaches. You learn how to regulate your breath when panic rises. You learn how to slow your body down so your mind can catch up. You learn how to create routines, not because they feel good, but because they keep you steady. You stop waiting for clarity to arrive before acting. You act, and clarity follows later. This is where many people break, because they are still negotiating with comfort. You are not. You are negotiating with reality, and reality does not respond to excuses. It responds to consistency. Small actions done daily begin to build something reliable inside you. Not optimism, not hope, reliability. Over time, something shifts. You no longer measure progress by how inspired you feel. You measure it by whether you showed up. You stop asking if you are strong enough and start proving it quietly through behavior. This is how endurance is built. Not in dramatic moments, but in ordinary days where you choose responsibility over relief. Illusions fall away in this process. You stop believing that someone is coming to save you. You stop believing that circumstances will suddenly soften. This isn't pessimism, it is clarity, and clarity gives you leverage. When expectations drop, effort becomes cleaner. You conserve energy by focusing only on what you can control. In this forge, identity begins to change. You are no longer defined by how you feel, how you are perceived, or how supported you are. You are defined by what you can sustain. Your nervous system adapts. What once overwhelmed you now registers as manageable. What once felt unbearable becomes familiar terrain. This kind of growth is invisible from the outside. No one applauds discipline. No one celebrates restraint. But restraint is what keeps you intact when pressure builds. It is what allows you to keep moving without burning out. It is what transforms pain from something that destabilizes you into something that sharpens you. You did not become hardened in this process. You became precise. You learned where to spend energy and where to stop wasting it. You learned that strength is not loud. It is repeatable. It is calm. It is sustainable. By the time others notice that you are strong, the work has already been done. The strength they see is not talent or temperament. It is the byproduct of countless quiet decisions made when no one was there to enforce them. You didn't just survive discomfort, you adapted to it, and adaptation is the foundation of every form of real power. At some point, the shift happens. Not loudly, not all at once, but quietly, almost without your permission. You realize you no longer react the way you used to. The same triggers appear, the same pressures surface, yet something in you slows down. Where there was once urgency, there is now space. That space becomes everything. Before, emotion moved faster than thought. Words came out before understanding arrived. Decisions were made in the heat of feeling and paid for later in regret. But isolation and endurance taught you something different. Reacting gives away power. It hands control to whatever provokes you. So you learned to pause. But pause is not weakness, it is restraint. It is the moment where you choose awareness over impulse. In that brief silence between stimulus and response, you regain authorship over yourself. You stop being pushed, you start choosing. This is not about suppressing emotion. You still feel deeply, but feelings no longer dictate direction. You allow them to rise, to speak, to pass without letting them hijack your behavior. Calm becomes a skill, not a personality trait, and like any skill, it is built through repetition. When tension rises, you breathe instead of escalating. When someone tries to rush you, you slow down even more. When provoked, you observe instead of defending. This shift unsettles people, not because you are cold, but because you are no longer predictable. Predictability is what makes manipulation effective. Awareness disrupts it. You begin to notice how often chaos is performative, how urgency is used to force compliance, how pressure is applied to make you abandon your judgment, and because you've trained yourself to sit in discomfort, those tactics lose their force. You do not need to win the moment, you are focused on choosing the right response. With time, this way of moving changes your internal climate. Your nervous system no longer spikes at every challenge. What once triggered anxiety now signals information. You respond to stress with assessment instead of alarm. This does not make life easier, but it makes you steadier. Steadiness is dangerous to anyone who relies on emotional reactions to maintain influence. When you stop reacting, people are forced to reveal intention. They show whether they are seeking connection or control. And you don't confront every inconsistency. You store information. You let patterns speak. Silence becomes strategic, not as withdrawal, but as discernment. You learn that not every challenge deserves engagement, and not every accusation deserves a defense. Some things dissolve when you don't feed them, others clarify when you give them time. This is where self-trust begins to solidify. You no longer need immediate reassurance. You no longer need to explain yourself to regulate your emotions. You know that clarity does not always come from conversation. It often comes from distance, from stepping back long enough to see clearly. As this discipline deepens, your presence changes. You move slower, but with intention. You listen more than you speak. You choose responses that align with long-term integrity rather than short-term relief. You are no longer governed by the need to be understood in the moment. You are governed by the need to stay aligned with yourself. Others may misinterpret this as detachment. In reality, it is integration. You have learned how to hold emotion without being consumed by it, how to stay present without being reactive, how to respond in ways that protect your dignity and preserve your energy. This transformation does not make you untouchable. It makes you unmovable. Pressure still arrives, conflict still exists, but it no longer dictates your internal state. You have learned that true power is not control over others, it is control over your response. And once you master that, chaos loses its grip, not because it disappears, but because it no longer decides who you become in the moment. There's a moment when fear quietly exits your life, not because everything becomes safe, but because being alone no longer feels like a threat. When solitude stops terrifying you, an entire system of control collapses. Guilt no longer hooks you, pressure no longer rushes you, silence no longer destabilizes you, and the people who once relied on those tools begin to lose leverage. Most manipulation depends on one assumption, that you are afraid to be left, afraid of distance, afraid of losing access, approval, or connection. But when you've already lived through absence, when you've sat with yourself long enough to know you won't disappear without someone else, fear no longer does the work it once did. You stop reacting to withdrawal as punishment. You stop interpreting distance as danger. You stop chasing reassurance when it's withheld. Instead, you recognize space for what it is, information. And information gives you clarity, not anxiety. This is where emotional freedom begins. You no longer outsource your sense of stability to other people's responses. You don't need constant feedback to know where you stand. You don't need immediate answers to feel grounded. You trust your internal read of situations because it was sharpened when no one else was there to confirm it. Silence changes meaning here. It stops being abandonment and becomes a tool, a filter, a test. In silence, intentions surface. People reveal whether they seek understanding or control, connection or compliance. And you don't interrupt that process anymore. You let time do the work. Time, consistency, and restraint become your shield. You don't rush conversations. You don't force clarity. You don't chase closure from people who have already shown you their limits. You allow patterns to repeat because repetition exposes truth faster than confrontation ever could. This does not make you detached. It makes you sovereign. You still care, but you are no longer captive to outcomes. You engage by choice, not by fear, and that distinction changes everything. When someone tries to guilt you, it doesn't land the same way. When someone threatens distance, you don't negotiate your boundaries. When someone withholds affection or communication to provoke a reaction, you don't supply it. Not out of spite, but out of self-respect. You've already learned that your nervous system does not need external regulation to survive. This freedom unsettles people who are used to leverage. Calm becomes disarming. Non-reactivity exposes agendas. When emotional hooks stop working, manipulation has nowhere to attach. And rather than confronting that directly, you simply remain steady. You don't explain your strength, you demonstrate it through consistency. You begin to move differently in relationships. You don't rush intimacy. You don't overinvest early. You don't confuse urgency with importance. You give access slowly and intentionally because you know how expensive rebuilding yourself once was. Energy becomes something you protect, not something you prove. Trust shifts inward. You believe your observations. You believe your instincts. You don't need to convince yourself that something feels off. It either aligns or it doesn't. And when it doesn't, you step back without drama. Distance becomes an answer, not a threat. This is the paradox. The less you fear being alone, the healthier your connections become. Because you're no longer staying out of fear, you're choosing out of alignment. And choice is the foundation of real freedom. You don't announce this change. You don't posture it. People feel it. They notice that you don't chase, that you don't over-explain, that you don't collapse when someone pulls away. And in that noticing, the dynamic shifts. Freedom doesn't make life easier. It makes it cleaner. You waste less energy. You argue less with reality. You stop investing in places that require self-betrayal to belong. You understand now that solitude is not a sentence, it is familiar ground. And when you know you can stand there without breaking, no one can use the fear of it against you ever again. At the end of all this quiet training, something settles into place. Not certainty about how life will unfold, but certainty about how you will meet it. This is where rebuilding becomes a way of living, not an emergency response. You no longer wait for collapse to recover. You live in a way that prevents unnecessary damage in the first place. You become selective, not guarded, not closed, but deliberate. You understand now that access is not a right. It is earned through respect, consistency, and alignment. Your boundaries are no longer explanations. They are decisions, quiet, firm, and enforced without performance. You stop overgiving to earn connection. You stop over-explaining to be understood. You stop stretching yourself thin to maintain proximity, not because you don't care, but because you finally understand the cost of self-abandonment. You know what it took to put yourself back together, and you refuse to undo that work for temporary comfort. Peace becomes a priority, not a reward. You no longer confuse intensity with meaning or chaos with depth. You recognize how exhausting emotional volatility is, and you choose steadiness instead. Stability stops feeling boring and starts feeling safe, not safe as in stagnant, but safe enough to build on. Rebuilding teaches you that not everything needs closure to end cleanly. Some chapters close through acceptance. Some relationships conclude through distance. You don't chase final conversations or perfect explanations anymore. You let reality finish the story for you. Acceptance becomes a form of release, and release restores energy. You trust yourself to handle endings without collapsing. You trust yourself to walk away without bitterness. You trust yourself to start again without losing identity. This trust doesn't come from optimism, it comes from memory. You remember what you survived when you had less clarity, less support, and fewer tools. Compared to that, uncertainty is manageable. Your sense of self becomes portable. It doesn't depend on environment, status, or approval. Wherever you go, you bring your center with you. That is why setbacks no longer feel like erasure. They feel like redirection. You adapt, recalibrate, and continue without drama. In relationships, you move with intention. You choose quality over quantity. You value reciprocity over familiarity. You don't romanticize loyalty from people who disappear when responsibility arrives. You observe behavior, not promises. Patterns matter more than words now. You give your energy where it's respected. Everywhere else, you remain polite, distant, and grounded. There is no anger in this, just clarity. You've learned that protecting your peace is not selfish, it's maintenance, and maintenance is what allows you to stay whole. This way of living creates a quiet confidence. You don't announce your growth, you let it show in how you respond, how you choose, how you walk away when alignment disappears. You no longer rush decisions to ease discomfort. You move at your own pace because you trust timing. Most importantly, you carry a deep, unshakable knowing. If everything were to fall apart again, you would rebuild. Not because you want to, but because you know how. You have done it before. You know how to strip things down to essentials. You know how to create structure where there is none. You know how to keep moving when outcomes are uncertain. This doesn't make you fearless, it makes you prepared. Prepared to lose what doesn't fit, prepared to release what drains you, prepared to choose yourself without apology, prepared to live with purpose rather than pressure. Rebuilding is no longer a phase. It is your foundation, and foundations built this way do not crack easily. They hold, they support, they endure. What this journey reveals is simple but demanding. Real strength is not built in moments of attention, but in seasons of quiet responsibility. When you learn to stand without reassurance, to move without applause, and to choose calm over reaction, you stop living at the mercy of circumstances. You become someone who can endure pressure without losing direction. Survival, when faced honestly, does not harden you, it refines you. It teaches you clarity, restraint, and self-trust. And once those are built, they stay with you, shaping every decision, boundary, and step forward. Lesson and how to apply it. The lesson is this: stop waiting for motivation or validation to act. Build small, repeatable disciplines that keep you steady, even on difficult days. Practice pausing before reacting. Protect your energy with clear boundaries. Choose consistency over intensity. In daily life, this means showing up even when no one notices, responding thoughtfully instead of emotionally, and investing your time only where there is respect and alignment. Question for you: do you believe strength is something you're born with or something you build through experience? Please share your view by commenting below so everyone can learn from each other. And if this message resonated with you, subscribe to Quiet Discipline Method to support the channel and help us keep creating meaningful content like this.